Welcome to Como Vanguard. I'm Nick Kanoth. In this special episode, I'm breaking down the City Council's 2026 retreat, a 2-day out-of-town meeting that brought together council members, department directors, and senior city leadership to talk about priorities, governance, communication, and the future direction of the city. Como Vanguard was the only news outlet present for the retreat, which gave us the exclusive opportunity to observe the conversations firsthand and speak directly with council members and department heads throughout the 2-day event. Now, retreats like this are interesting because there are no formal votes. No ordinances are passed, but in many ways, these conversations are where the groundwork for future policy gets laid. It's where frustrations surface, priorities get clarified, relationships can be tested, and sometimes where major shifts in thinking quietly begin to emerge. And this year's retreat had some of those moments. The retreat opened with a fairly reflective exercise centered around what motivates people in public service and their why. What stood out was how many department heads and city leaders talked about public service as a family legacy. Several spoke about growing up around municipal government, public safety, or civic work in general, and how carrying that tradition forward means something deeply personal to them. There was also a noticeable emphasis on collaboration and service. You heard recurring themes around helping people, improving quality of life, problem solving, and building systems that function better for residents. Mayor Barbara Buffalo framed the retreat around the idea of, quote, building trust, and specifically referenced Fire Chief Brian Schaefer's message from a prior retreat about, quote, assuming good intent in interactions between council and staff. That theme, relationships, communication, trust, really carried through almost every major conversation over the 2 days. At the end of the retreat's first day, I spoke with Mayor Barbara Buffalo about the tone of the conversations, the challenges council is wrestling with, and what she hoped would come out of day 2. All right, listeners, I am joined here with Mayor Barbara Buffalo. We are at the end of the first day of the council retreat for 2026. Mayor Buffalo, how are you feeling about today?
It was a good day. It was a lot of information there at the end. It was like 2 hours of hearing challenges and updates from department directors for each of our council members, which was a lot of information. But I'm feeling good because while starting off the day, I was a little bit nervous. We have a lot of new council members, really wanting to set the foundation for why we do retreats. And then to hear some of those hopes and dreams reflected in the council's takeaways at the end was really great to hear. Oh, we have a lot of great staff doing hard work. There's a lot of knowledge in this room, and there's a lot of support to work creatively to solve the solutions or to come up with solutions to solve the problems.
So this was part 1 of 2, essentially, for the retreat. Going to tomorrow, and as you go to sleep tonight, what are you kind of noodling on after today? Like, what's in your mind that you're like, I need to think about this some more, maybe?
Yeah, well, there's the topics that we put into the bike rack, and those are way bigger topics than we can really accomplish in a 45-minute, 90-minute conversation, because they're about real changes to how we have council meetings and what the expectations of them are. And I think we need to remember to keep our current understanding of our current resources that we have to meet those needs and try to come up with what's going to work. So I'm really going to lean on pushing this to staff and being like, look, some of you have worked here 30 years. Some of you had worked in 30 cities. What do you think would work in Columbia? And pitch some final ideas to us.
Last question for you. Heading into tomorrow, what is your hope for tomorrow? What do you hope you guys accomplish? What are you looking for?
Well, tomorrow a big topic is going to be around engagement. And we say we want engagement. And so it'll be really is this what we're envisioning? And I'm excited. We have there's a draft toolkit out there and prompts and guide. And I'm really excited about that. And so us actually implementing that will be key.
That conversation about expectations, engagement, and even the structure of council meetings would continue throughout the second day. Council members also outlined the issue areas they see as priorities moving forward. Ward 1 Councilwoman Valerie Carroll focused heavily on housing policy, transparency, and making city ordinances easier for residents to actually understand. Ward 3 Councilwoman Jackie Sample emphasized youth engagement, including interest in a youth center in Ward 3 and an ADA-accessible ball field. Ward 2 Councilwoman Vera Elwood highlighted the importance of supporting city staff and improving public access to information, including making city information more searchable and easier to navigate. Ward 5 Councilwoman Christina Hartman and Ward 6 Councilwoman Betsy Peters both focused heavily on infrastructure, especially utilities and sewer systems. Ward 4 Councilman Nick Foster talked about implementing the city's housing study recommendations, including the city's strategic plans and the need for a downtown public restroom. And Mayor Buffalo identified effective governance itself as one of her top priorities, as well as sustainable planned development. And honestly, that governance conversation became the centerpiece of the retreat. At the end of day one, I also spoke with Councilwoman Valerie Carroll about what stood out to her from the retreat conversations. Listeners, I'm joined here by Councilwoman Valerie Carroll out of Ward 1. Councilwoman, we just ended the first day of the 2026 council retreat. How are you feeling? What's your takeaways?
Yeah, I feel great. I'm glad to be here. I'm hearing really just a tremendous desire to serve the community and a high level of commitment from our city staff. I really appreciate this time to connect with them and really get their read on how they want to meet the needs that they see.
After today, what's kind of the one thing, one subject or specific issue that's sticking in your mind that you're like, I'm probably going to be thinking about this tonight as I fall asleep and come into tomorrow morning with the coffee? What's that one issue that right now that's just sticking in your brain? Maybe something you learned, maybe something you're like, I want to ask this tomorrow. What it could be anything.
One issue. I don't have one. I have 10 always. Big issue is growth in terms of our city, in terms of people wanting to live here, growth in terms of our services. How are we able to meet the needs of our city with the finances that we have, and growth in terms of our staff? How are we able to keep the number of people for a service organization to really meet increasing demands of services?
That tension between growth, expectations, staffing capacity, and governance structure showed up repeatedly throughout the retreat. A huge amount of time was spent discussing council operations, how meetings function, how council members communicate with staff, how constituents' concerns are tracked, and where the city's current processes are sustainable. One thing staff previewed was a developing city council open tickets system that would essentially track council inquiries and constituent concerns in a more transparent and organized way. There was also a pretty candid conversation about public frustration around responsiveness. Council members acknowledged that residents and council members themselves often do not know who is responsible for responding to concerns, whether emails are being tracked, or where requests stand in the process. Those concerns were not limited to council members. At the end of day one, I spoke with DeMarcus Thomas Brown, administrator of Columbia's Office of Violence Prevention, about the themes that stood out most to him from the retreat. Listeners, I am joined here by DeMarcus Thomas Brown. He is the administrator for the Office of Violence Prevention. And at some point in the future, we'll do a whole episode with him on his office and the things they're working on. But for today, we're at the 2026 Council Retreat. We just wrapped up the first day. DeMarcus, how are you feeling after today? What's on your mind?
Engagement. There's a lot of talk, a lot of candid speech about just some of the practicing and the behaviors of as far as our meetings go, behaviors with council and then with staff interaction with council. It's encouraging for some folks to be honest and open about what's going on. I think we have a lot of work to do going forward.
I would agree with that. I was sure most folks here today would. So towards that end, wrapped up day one, day two's tomorrow. Obviously today was heavy, lots of subjects. What's one subject? You said engagement already, but what's one thing? Maybe it's an issue, maybe it's a question that you're walking away with that is on your mind as a result of everything that happened today.
Yeah, I would say communal impact, or how do we meet the community and not put the burden on the community to meet us where we are, and have like a process forward to look at some of the things that affect everybody. And I think that's the thing we're talking around.
What's the one thing you're hoping happens tomorrow? If nothing else, you hope that you guys make progress on X or Y, or maybe additional clarity on something.
The email questions. I hope hope some kind of solve or practice comes together with that, and our meeting structure. I think we can get those things. I think this is, if there's one thing we can solve these few hours, I hope that comes into equation. So
that question, whether residents are being asked to navigate government systems rather than government adapting to community needs, sat underneath many of the retreat's governance conversations. And from there, the discussion naturally evolved into larger questions about council meetings themselves. Probably the biggest operational discussion involved public comment. Council members expressed significant interest in piloting a change that would move public comment on legislation from the second reading phase, basically the voting stage, to the earlier introduction and first reading phase. The reasoning is pretty straightforward. If residents are going to provide feedback, council and staff should ideally receive that feedback before legislation is essentially finalized right before a vote. There seemed to be broad support for testing that idea, though council members also acknowledged they likely would not implement it until after the current budget process, so they do not disrupt systems staff and the public are already used to. And if that change eventually happens, it would represent a pretty meaningful shift in how legislative engagement works in Columbia. At the conclusion of the retreat, I engaged Councilwoman Jackie Sample, who reflected on two of the retreat's biggest conversations: restructuring public comment and whether Columbia's current part-time council model is still sustainable for a growing city. Joined here by Ward 3 Councilwoman Dr. Jackie Sample. We are at the end of the council retreat. Councilwoman, what is your takeaway? How are you feeling?
I'm feeling pretty good. I always enjoy the retreat and the opportunity to meet formally and informally with my team members, because that's what we are. We're team members. And so I'm feeling pretty good.
Is there any one issue that you all made progress on this week that you look forward to seeing what comes of it, how it actually gets implemented?
I'm very interested in the discussion on moving public hearing, public comment to first read. That's been something we've been talking about pretty much since I started on council. And so I'm going to be interested to see what staff comes back with and what that might look like for us. I'm also very interested in the discussion that was somewhat formally started today about asking for staff to come back with information on what it would look like to have a full-time council. I think that's an important direction for our city.
I agree. That last subject that Councilman Nick Foster, as I was sitting here, I thought he was really saying the quiet part out loud, right? That you're all bumping up against the reality of the city has grown. Everybody expects everything of council members, whether it's citizens or staff, but you're limited by the arbitrary nature of the role, which is that technically council is a part-time volunteer role. You're not actually compensated. You have a stipend of, was it $600 a month, something like that, before taxes. So not livable wage. And so I too am curious to see what that comes of. Is there anything else top of mind that you're like, this is going to stick with me going forward?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. You just kind of remind people that people don't sit on city council as a hobby. And so that discussion of full-time council members is an important one to have, while also being respectful and fiscally responsible when we're thinking about our budget. So we all realize those limitations. But additionally, something that Chief Schluty said earlier that I've heard before, but I liked the way she worded it, was to basically don't let the process become the mission. And governmental agencies at all levels tend to get caught on definitions and the process before we ever actually get to the actual problem solving. And so I wrote that down, and that's kind of going to become my mantra, is we're not going to let the process become the mission. We're going to keep our eyes on the mission, and we're going to get stuff done.
I appreciate that distinction, and I certainly look forward to seeing what comes of it as well. Another major theme was simply the growing workload of city government and the increasing demands being placed on council members. There was a fairly blunt acknowledgement throughout the retreat that the current system is under strain. Council members talked about increasingly long meetings, constant information flow, and the reality that there really is, quote, no such thing as catching up anymore. Council agreed to continue using off-Monday work sessions for deeper policy discussions, but there was also recognition that those extra meetings have not necessarily shortened regular council meetings the way some had hoped. At the conclusion of the retreat, I spoke with Councilwoman Vera Elwood, who said one of the retreat's most valuable outcomes may have simply been getting everyone in the same room to realize they were not always approaching council processes and expectations from the same perspective. I'm joined here with Councilwoman Vera Elwood from Ward 2. How are you feeling? Council retreat is wrapped up. This is your first council retreat, if I'm not mistaken. And how'd it go?
My first full council retreat. I got to go to the little half mini retreat that we do partway through the year. And this year it did not have full staff. So I was really excited to get to hear from all of the department heads, get to have everyone in the same room having conversation. And I think that was what I enjoyed the most as we were wrapping up, to really get everyone's input on things.
Is there any one issue or takeaway from this where you're looking forward to seeing, hey, what comes of that? See how it's implemented, something like that.
I am always a process and procedures nerd, so that is the stuff I'm always going to be most excited about, even if it's not necessarily the sexy part of city government. I'm really excited to see our new engagement guide going out and moving forward, and I'm really excited to see how the conversations around that might change what it looks like to do engagement before and during council meetings, and also looking at our meeting expectations for council ourselves and kind of resetting our own expectations to figure out, what do we expect of each other? What do we expect of the public? What are the conversations looking like? So I'm really excited about kind of really this opportunity to relook at our council meetings functioning for us.
Towards that end, one thing that came up the second day today, you were clearly somebody who was passionate about it for obvious reasons in terms of, hey, there's a lot of things we want to get done. How do we go about getting that done? And that subject today was work sessions or pre-council meetings, whatever you want to call it, and having more of them. What should they look like? How should they operate? Were you satisfied with where that landed today?
I think today was the start of a conversation, and I'm really satisfied with how that conversation has started. So I don't think we came to any definitive ending. We came up with a lot of potential solutions, but I think at the very least, we are all at a place of realizing I'm not sure anyone in this room had the same idea, expectation, definition of what it looked like to move forward with something as a council member when that item doesn't come directly from staff. And so I am really, really hopeful that we're going to see movement on that in some direction very soon. And it's going to be really positive for the whole city.
No, I agree. I think your point is spot on about how it was less about a finished, clear direction and much more about, hey, here is an existing issue. Now we're all in agreement that there is a lack of clarity around this. Here are some ideas on how we could move forward and go from there.
Yeah. And I think that was really important to have in this room specifically, which it can feel kind of frustrating to keep being told, wait for the retreat, wait for the retreat. And then I got here and I was like, oh, this is why we waited, because we literally had everyone in the room to where we were getting input from people where I was thinking, holy cow, that has completely changed my perspective. Or I was thinking I had no clue they saw it that way. And so I think getting everyone just onto the same page of even just the realization we don't see it the same way, I think was really great for that relationship aspect of it.
And that growing realization that governance expectations, meeting structures, and operational assumptions may no longer be aligned with the realities of a growing city set the stage for one of the retreat's most notable discussions. Councilman Nick Foster openly raised the question of whether Columbia should begin seriously considering transitioning council positions from part-time roles into full-time positions. And what was striking was not just the idea itself, it was the level of apparent agreement in the room. Even some council members who acknowledged they personally may not continue serving under a full-time structure still seem to agree that it may ultimately be the direction the city needs to go as Columbia grows and governance becomes more complex. That is a significant conversation, because once you start seriously discussing full-time council service, you are also discussing compensation, accessibility to office, governance expectations, and fundamentally what kind of governing body Columbia wants to have long term. Another moment that drew attention came from Fire Chief Brian Schaefer, who at one point said the quiet part out loud, stating that the current structure and timing of council meetings are less than effective and unnecessarily restrictive. And honestly, that comment seemed to capture a broader feeling that emerged throughout the retreat. The city's governance systems may increasingly be outgrowing the structure they were originally designed around. There were repeated conversations about balancing transparency with efficiency, balancing public participation with decision-making capacity, and balancing the realities of a growing city against the limitations of part-time governance. That tension between growth, staffing capacity, governance expectations, and service delivery was not theoretical. At the conclusion of the retreat, I heard from Rebecca Roslet, Director of Columbia's Department of Public Health and Human Services, about what stood out to her from the conversations. Listeners, I'm joined here by Rebecca Roslet. She is the Director of Public Health and Human Services. Rebecca, council retreat's over. What was the takeaway? How are you feeling about it?
So the thing I really appreciate about the council retreats is that staff don't have a lot of direct interaction with council outside of the Monday night meetings. The city staff, we report to the city manager, who he then has the day-to-day contact with council. So this is a nice opportunity for staff to have some more informal conversations with their city council members. And we always appreciate the opportunity to just learn more about one another as people.
Was there any one thing that stuck out to you in terms of, hearing council speak about one thing or another? They're like, oh, you know what? That is good for me to know. I'm going to take that back to my department.
Yeah. So one thing that I really appreciated this year is that the facilitator asked each council member what their priorities were. And I don't know that that's something we've ever heard verbalized before. So that really helps us when we're thinking, how do we want to make sure that council are informed on a particular item? If we know that that's a passion area for a council member, it may give us an opportunity to be more intentional in our communication. So I really appreciated that addition this year.
It was very enlightening. It's just as somebody who's more on the sidelines observing. It was good information to know, right? So last question for you. You had mentioned throughout this conversation over the last day and a half that one of the things your department's facing is staffing needs, specifically around animal control. You said there's been a large increase in demand just as the city has grown. There's more animal control issues happening. And you're saying, hey, I'm going to need more staff to handle that. Could you share more with us about that?
Sure. One item that I have on the upcoming budget is a request for additional animal control officers. Our animal control FTEs have not kept pace with our population growth. That is a 7-day-a-week operation, so we really need to increase our capacity. Last year, we had over 400 reported animal bites, and so that gives you an idea of the scale of the need for keeping our residents safe. We don't have the capacity to do any type of true prevention work at this point. We're just responding to the bites, animals running it loose, and we really need to increase our staffing to accommodate for our population growth.
I think that was a common theme in this retreat was adjusting staff to meet the expectations of the services citizens want and need, right? And in many ways, that may have been one of the retreat's clearest underlying themes. Columbia's growth is increasingly forcing conversations about whether the city's staffing structures, governance systems, and operational expectations are keeping pace with community demand. Those are not easy tensions to resolve, but the retreat made clear that council and staff are actively grappling with them. At the conclusion of the retreat, I also spoke with Councilwoman Betsy Peters about how she felt the two-day conversation had gone and what she hoped would come from it moving forward. Listeners, I'm joined here by Councilwoman Betsy Peters out of Ward 6. We are at the end of the council retreat. How did the retreat go? What's your feedback? What's your takeaway?
As usual, I think this retreat went really well. It's very nice to be able to get away from the city and to have all of our directors come so that we can just sort of talk about city issues and how to do a better job of supporting the city and supporting our citizens.
Did this meet your expectations coming into it? Is this what you were looking for?
Yes, it did. We've started doing this every year. And we found that it is really quite helpful just to have a chance to talk, not at a meeting, not with a specific time limit, but to be able to sort of talk about how we communicate with citizens, how we communicate with each other, how we make sure we get the work of the city done.
Last question for you. What's one thing you're taking away where like, I'm glad we made progress on this and I look forward to seeing what comes of it?
I think, maybe looking at how we communicate with our citizens and how we can make the city council meetings more efficient while still doing the work that we need to do.
And that focus on communication, efficiency, and governance structure ultimately became one of the defining through lines of this year's retreat. The retreat wrapped up with broader conversations about the city's upcoming budget cycle, organizational priorities, and City Manager DeCarlin Seawood's theme moving forward, quote, building a stronger Columbia together. And while retreats can sometimes feel abstract or procedural from the outside, this one contained several discussions that could directly shape how Columbia's government functions over the next few years, from public comment procedures to meeting structure to even the long-term nature of council service itself. If you want to read the full written report or view additional photos and retreat materials, you can find all of that through Como Vanguard on Substack. You can find it at comovanguard.com. That coverage, including on-site reporting, interviews, photography, and this podcast episode was only possible because Como Vanguard was there covering the retreat directly as the only media outlet in attendance. And as always, this kind of in-depth reporting is made possible through paid subscriber support. To everyone who already subscribes, thank you. Your support allows us to dedicate the time and resources necessary to cover local government beyond just regular council meetings. I'm Nick Kenoth. Thank you for listening to Como Vanguard.